I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would end up in a full-blown war with a homeowners association. But then again, I never expected someone to try stealing my snowblower in broad daylight either. My name is Gregory Walsh, and I'd been living in the peaceful suburban neighborhood of Maple Ridge Estates in Naperville, Illinois, for about 3 years when everything went sideways. I'm a software engineer who works from home most days, which means I'm usually around to see the daily drama that unfolds in our little community. The house I bought was a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage, and I'd always kept my property in pristine condition. I mowed my lawn on schedule, kept my hedges trimmed, and never once violated any of the HOA rules that seemed to multiply like rabbits every few months. The trouble started in late January during one of those brutal Midwestern winters where the snow just kept coming. We'd already had 4 major storms that month, and I'd invested in a top-of-the-line Ariens Deluxe snowblower that cost me nearly $1,500. It was a beautiful machine with heated hand grips, LED headlights, and enough power to cut through the heaviest, wettest snow like butter. I kept it in my garage, but sometimes after clearing my driveway and sidewalk, I'd leave it on the side of my house for a few hours to cool down before putting it away. That's where Sharon Whitmore came into the picture. Sharon was the vice president of our HOA, a position she wielded like a scepter of absolute power. She was a 47-year-old woman with that distinctive haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from 3 blocks away. You know the one, short in the back and longer in the front, dyed an aggressive shade of blonde with dark roots that she never seemed to get touched up on time. She wore oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days, and had a collection of live, laugh, love signs in her yard that violated at least 3 HOA regulations. But of course, nobody ever called her out on it. Sharon lived 4 houses down from me in a larger home that her ex-husband had been forced to sign over in their divorce. She drove a white Lexus SUV with one of those stick-figure family stickers on the back, except someone had scratched off what I assumed was the husband figure. She had 2 teenage kids who rarely came outside, probably because they were embarrassed by their mother's constant neighborhood crusades. The first real interaction I had with Sharon happened about 6 months after I moved in. She knocked on my door on a Saturday morning, holding a clipboard and wearing a pantsuit that looked like she was about to attend a business meeting rather than walk around a residential neighborhood. "Hello, you must be Gregory," she said, not waiting for me to confirm before continuing. "I'm Sharon Whitmore, Vice President of the Maple Ridge Estates HOA. I've been meaning to stop by and introduce myself." "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to be neighborly despite the early hour. "I couldn't help but notice that your trash cans are visible from the street," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "According to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our HOA bylaws, all trash receptacles must be stored out of sight except on collection days." I glanced at my driveway where my trash can sat neatly against the side of my garage. "It's Thursday. Tomorrow is collection day." "Collection day starts at midnight," Sharon said, clicking her pen. "That means you can't put them out until after midnight Thursday morning." "It's currently Saturday, so they've been out for 2 days past the allowable time." I stared at her, trying to determine if she was serious. She was. "I'll move them right now," I said, deciding that arguing wasn't worth the hassle. "I appreciate your cooperation," Sharon said, making a note on her clipboard. "I'm sure we won't have any more issues." But of course, there were more issues. Over the next few years, Sharon found reasons to cite me for the most ridiculous violations imaginable. My holiday lights were up 2 days past the January 15th deadline. My lawn was exactly 3.5 inches tall when the maximum allowed height was 3 inches. I'd painted my front door a shade of red that was apparently not on the pre-approved color list, even though 3 other houses on the street had similar red doors that predated the color restrictions. Each violation came with a formal letter and a fine that started at $50 but escalated with each subsequent infraction. I paid the first few, figuring it was easier than fighting, but eventually I started pushing back. I attended HOA meetings, I requested copies of all the bylaws, and I made sure I followed every single rule to the letter. It drove Sharon crazy that she couldn't find legitimate reasons to fine me anymore. Then came the winter of the snowblower incident. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and we'd just gotten hammered with 18 inches of heavy, wet snow overnight. I'd spent the better part of the morning clearing my driveway, my sidewalk, and even helped my elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson clear hers. My snowblower was still warm, so I left it on the side of my house to cool down while I went inside to make some lunch and warm up. I was heating up some soup when my phone buzzed with a notification from my neighbor Dave. Dave lived directly next to me and had recently installed a Ring doorbell system with cameras covering his front yard, driveway, and the street. We'd become friendly over the years, bonding over our mutual frustration with Sharon's HOA antics. The text message from Dave simply said, "Dude, you need to see this. Check your snowblower." I put down my soup and pulled on my boots, heading back outside. My heart sank when I reached the side of my house. The spot where I'd left my snowblower was empty. Just tire tracks in the snow leading from my property toward the street. I immediately called Dave. "What happened? Did you see someone take it?" "Better than that," Dave said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "My Ring camera caught the whole thing. Get over here." I trudged through the snow to Dave's house, and he met me at the door with his laptop already open. "You're not going to believe this," he said, pulling up the video footage. The timestamp showed that just 20 minutes earlier, a white Lexus SUV had pulled up in front of my house. The video clearly showed Sharon Whitmore getting out of the driver's seat, looking around nervously, then walking onto my property. She disappeared from the frame for a moment, then reappeared pulling my $1,500 snowblower down my driveway. The video captured her struggling to lift it into the back of her SUV, the license plate clearly visible the entire time. "She just stole your snowblower," Dave said, shaking his head in disbelief. "In the middle of the afternoon. What was she thinking?" I watched the video 3 more times, my anger building with each viewing. "I don't know, but I'm calling the police." "Wait," Dave said, holding up his hand. "I already sent this to myself. Let me send it to you too. Make sure you have a copy before you do anything." I appreciated Dave's foresight. He transferred the video file to my phone, and I saved backup copies to my cloud storage and emailed it to myself. Only then did I call the Naperville Police Department. The dispatcher took my information and said an officer would be out within the hour. While I waited, I called my insurance company to report the theft and documented everything. I took photos of where the snowblower had been, the tire tracks, and screenshots of the Ring camera footage with timestamps. Officer Michael Rodriguez arrived about 45 minutes later. He was a younger cop, probably in his early 30s, with a professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I explained the situation, showed him where the snowblower had been, and then pulled up the video on my phone. Officer Rodriguez watched the footage carefully, then asked me to send it to his email. "That's pretty clear evidence," he said. "You know this woman, Sharon Whitmore," I said. "She's the vice president of our HOA, lives 4 houses down at 2847 Oakmont Drive." Do you have any idea why she would take your snowblower? I thought about it. We've had issues before. She's constantly trying to fine me for HOA violations, most of them completely ridiculous. But I never thought she'd actually steal from me. Officer Rodriguez made notes. I'm going to head over to her residence and speak with her. Would you like to come along, or would you prefer to wait here? I'll come, I said immediately. There was no way I was missing this confrontation. We walked down the street together, Officer Rodriguez in front and me following behind. The neighborhood was quiet, most people still inside warming up after the morning's snow removal efforts. Sharon's house looked immaculate as always, her driveway professionally plowed, her walkway perfectly salted. Officer Rodriguez knocked on the door and we waited. After a moment, Sharon opened it, still wearing the same puffy coat she'd had on in the video. Her expression went from confused to annoyed when she saw me standing behind the officer. "Can I help you?" Sharon asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Madam, I'm Officer Rodriguez with the Naperville Police Department. We've received a report of a stolen snowblower, and we have video evidence that shows you removing one from this gentleman's property about an hour ago." Sharon's face went pale, then quickly flushed red. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been home all afternoon." "Madam, we have clear video footage showing you loading a snowblower into your vehicle," Officer Rodriguez said calmly. "The license plate of your Lexus SUV is clearly visible in the video." "That's impossible," Sharon sputtered. "I would never steal anything. This is clearly some kind of setup. Gregory has been trying to discredit me for years because I enforce the HOA rules." I couldn't help myself. "So you're saying that's not you in the video?" "Because it sure looks like you, wearing the exact same coat you have on right now." Sharon glared at me. "I don't have to explain myself to you. And officer, I think you should know that this man has a history of violating community standards. He's clearly trying to frame me for something I didn't do." Officer Rodriguez remained professional. "Madam, I'm going to need to see your vehicle. If the snowblower isn't there, then we can clear this up quickly." "You can't search my vehicle without a warrant," Sharon said, crossing her arms. "That's true," Officer Rodriguez agreed. "However, refusing to cooperate makes this situation much more complicated. If you're innocent, the easiest way to prove it would be to let me take a quick look." Sharon's eyes darted between me and the officer. I could practically see her mind working, trying to figure out her next move. "Fine," she finally said, "but I'm calling my lawyer." "That's your right," Officer Rodriguez said. "Where's the vehicle?" "In the garage," Sharon admitted. We followed her through the house to the attached garage. The moment she opened the door, there it was. My Arian's deluxe snowblower, sitting in the back of her Lexus exactly where the video had shown her loading it. The orange paint and my custom modifications made it unmistakably mine. "That's my snowblower," I said, pointing. "See that scratch on the side panel? I accidentally hit my garbage can last week, and that's my phone number written on the handle." Officer Rodriguez took photos and examined the snowblower. Sure enough, my phone number was written in permanent marker on the handle, something I'd done shortly after purchasing it. "Madam, I'm going to need you to step outside," Officer Rodriguez said to Sharon. His tone had shifted from cordial to official. "This is ridiculous," Sharon said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "I can explain everything." "I'd like to hear that explanation," Officer Rodriguez said. We moved back to the front of the house. Sharon kept trying to come up with some story that made sense, but nothing coherent came out. Finally, she settled on the most absurd excuse I'd ever heard. "It was abandoned property," Sharon declared. "Gregory left it sitting on the side of his house for hours." According to HOA bylaws, Any property left visible from the street for more than 2 hours is considered abandoned and can be removed by the association. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Madam, HOA bylaws don't supersede state law. Taking someone else's property without permission is theft, regardless of what your community rules say. I was going to return it, Sharon tried. I was just holding it temporarily until Gregory properly stored it, by loading it into your vehicle and driving away. I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Officer Rodriguez held up a hand to silence me. Madam, based on the video evidence and the presence of the stolen property in your vehicle, I'm going to have to place you under arrest for theft. Sharon's face went from red to white in an instant. You can't be serious. Do you know who I am? I'm on the HOA board. I have connections in this community. That doesn't give you the right to take other people's property, Officer Rodriguez said, pulling out his handcuffs. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. This is insane, Sharon shrieked. I'm not a criminal. This is all a misunderstanding, but Officer Rodriguez wasn't having it. He read Sharon her Miranda rights while she continued to protest and placed her in handcuffs. Several neighbors had come out of their houses by this point, drawn by the commotion. I saw curtains twitching and people openly staring as Sharon was led to the police car. Mr. Walsh, you're free to retrieve your property, Officer Rodriguez said to me. You'll need to come down to the station later to give a formal statement. Of course, I said, still processing what had just happened. Thank you, officer. I retrieved my snowblower from Sharon's garage, checking it over to make sure she hadn't damaged it. Everything seemed fine, so I rolled it back to my house, very aware of all the neighbors watching. Dave met me in my driveway with a huge grin on his face. That was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed, Dave said. Did you see her face when the cop pulled out the handcuffs? I still can't believe she actually tried to steal it, I said, parking the snowblower safely in my garage this time. What was she thinking? She wasn't thinking, Dave replied. Sharon's been drunk on her little bit of HOA power for so long that she thought she could do whatever she wanted. This has been coming for a while. Over the next few days, the story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People I'd never spoken to before stopped me to ask about what happened. It turned out that nearly everyone had some kind of horror story about Sharon and her heavy-handed enforcement of HOA rules. Mrs. Patterson told me about the time Sharon tried to fine her because her seasonal wreath was still up 3 days after Christmas. The Martinez family down the street had been cited for having a basketball hoop that was apparently 1 inch too close to the street. The more stories I heard, the more I realized that Sharon had been terrorizing the entire neighborhood for years. People had just accepted it because they didn't want the hassle of fighting back. But now that she'd been arrested for theft, everyone suddenly felt emboldened to speak up. The following Monday, I went to the police station to give my formal statement. Officer Rodriguez met with me and took me through everything that had happened, having me verify details and sign paperwork. He mentioned that Sharon had been released on bond, but was facing criminal charges for theft over $1,000, which was a Class 3 felony in Illinois. She's trying to claim it was all a misunderstanding, Officer Rodriguez told me, but the video evidence is pretty damning. Her lawyer is probably going to try to negotiate a plea deal. What happens if she's convicted? I asked. Class 3 felony can carry a sentence of 2 to 5 years in prison, though for a first-time offender, she'd more likely get probation and community service. But she'd have a felony on her record. The thought of Sharon doing jail time seemed surreal, but she'd brought this on herself. I'd never done anything to her beyond existing in the neighborhood and trying to follow the rules. That evening, I got an unexpected knock on my door. When I opened it, I found Evelyn Palmer, the president of our HOA. Evelyn was in her early 60s, a retired teacher who'd always seemed reasonable during the few interactions I'd had with her. She looked uncomfortable. "Gregory, do you have a few minutes to talk?" Evelyn asked. "Sure, come in," I said, leading her to my living room. Evelyn sat down and sighed heavily. "I want to apologize for everything that's happened. I had no idea Sharon was targeting you and other residents the way she was. As HOA president, I should have been more aware of what was going on." "I appreciate that," I said, surprised by her candor. "How long have you known about the theft?" "I heard about it the same evening it happened," Evelyn said. "Half the neighborhood was talking about it. I've been doing some investigating since then, going through HOA records and talking to residents. Sharon has been issuing fines left and right, most of them for violations that don't actually exist in our bylaws." "What do you mean?" Evelyn pulled out a folder from her bag. "I mean she's been making things up. That rule about trash cans only being visible starting at midnight on collection day doesn't exist. The maximum lawn height of 3 inches. Our bylaws actually say 4 inches. The approved paint color list. We don't have one. We just say colors should be tasteful and maintain property values." I felt my anger rising again. "So she's been fining people for fake violations?" "It appears that way," Evelyn confirmed. "And she's been pocketing some of the fine money. Our treasurer noticed discrepancies in the accounts, but Sharon always had explanations. Now that we're looking closer, it seems she's embezzled several $1,000s over the past 2 years." "Have you reported this to the police?" "That's my next stop after this conversation," Evelyn said. "But I wanted you to know that the HOA board is voting to remove Sharon from her position. We're also going to be reviewing all the fines she's issued and refunding any that were improper." "I appreciate you telling me this," I said. "It's good to know the whole board isn't corrupt." Evelyn smiled sadly. "Most of us are just trying to maintain a nice community. Sharon took advantage of the fact that the rest of us have jobs and lives and don't have time to micromanage HOA business. She's been operating with almost no oversight." After Evelyn left, I sat in my living room thinking about everything that had happened. What started as someone stealing my snowblower had uncovered years of abuse and financial fraud. I wondered how many other HOAs had similar problems with power-hungry board members who used their positions to bully residents. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn followed through on reporting Sharon's embezzlement to the police, which added fraud charges to Sharon's legal troubles. The HOA held an emergency meeting where Sharon was officially removed from the board, though she didn't attend in person. Her lawyer sent a resignation letter that claimed she was stepping down for personal reasons. At that same meeting, the board announced they'd be refunding improper fines, which generated applause from the packed room of homeowners. It turned out Sharon had collected over $40,000 in fines over her 5-year tenure, and at least half of them were for fake violations. Some people were getting refunds of several $100s. I also learned that I wasn't the only person Sharon had stolen from. The Martinez family came forward to say that their pressure washer had disappeared from their back patio last summer. They'd assumed it was random theft, but now they suspected Sharon. Unfortunately, they didn't have video evidence, but it added to the pattern of behavior. Sharon's criminal case moved slowly through the legal system. Her lawyer tried multiple times to get the charges reduced or dismissed, but the video evidence made that nearly impossible. The prosecution offered a plea deal where Sharon would plead guilty to a reduced charge of theft under $1,000, a misdemeanor, in exchange for paying full restitution, performing 200 hours of community service, and serving 2 years of probation. I had mixed feelings when the prosecutor's office contacted me about the plea deal. Part of me wanted to see Sharon face the full consequences of her actions, including the felony charge. But another part of me just wanted the whole thing to be over. The prosecutor explained that going to trial would take months, maybe years, and there was always a chance a jury might be sympathetic to Sharon's claims of confusion or misunderstanding, even though those claims were ridiculous. In the end, I told the prosecutor I'd accept whatever they thought was best. The plea deal went through, and Sharon appeared in court in March to officially plead guilty. I attended the hearing, curious to see if Sharon would show any remorse. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and there were only a handful of people present besides the court staff. Sharon sat at the defense table with her lawyer, wearing a conservative dark suit and minimal makeup. She looked smaller somehow, diminished from the commanding presence she'd always projected in the neighborhood. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 50s named Judge Catherine Morrison, reviewed the plea agreement and asked Sharon a series of questions to ensure she understood what she was agreeing to. Miss Whitmore, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you're admitting to unlawfully taking property that didn't belong to you? Yes, Your Honor, Sharon said quietly. And do you understand the terms of your probation, including the requirement that you have no contact with the victim, Mr. Gregory Walsh? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything you'd like to say before I accept this plea? Sharon hesitated, then stood up. Your Honor, I want to apologize for my actions. I made a serious error in judgment and I take full responsibility. I never meant to cause harm to anyone. I was under a lot of stress and I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry. It was the most subdued I'd ever seen Sharon, but I noticed she never looked in my direction during her apology. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced Sharon according to the terms of the agreement. As part of the restitution, Sharon had to pay me back the full value of the snowblower, even though I'd gotten it back undamaged. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse feeling strangely empty. I'd expected to feel satisfaction or vindication, but mostly I just felt tired. The whole experience had consumed months of my life and caused stress I hadn't needed. Dave was waiting for me outside the courthouse. He'd taken the morning off to come support me. How'd it go? She pleaded guilty, I said. 2 years probation, community service, and she has to pay restitution. That's good, right? Yeah, I guess. I don't know what I was expecting. Dave clapped me on the shoulder. Let's get breakfast, my treat. We went to a nearby diner and ordered coffee and pancakes. As we ate, Dave told me about the latest developments in the neighborhood. With Sharon gone, the HOA had elected new board members and was in the process of revising all the bylaws to make them more reasonable and clearly defined. They're also implementing better oversight, Dave said. No more one person having unilateral authority to issue fines. Everything has to go through a review process now. That's good, I said. Maybe this whole nightmare will actually result in some positive changes. Already has, Dave confirmed. Mrs. Patterson told me she actually likes living in the neighborhood again. She was seriously considering selling just to get away from Sharon's harassment. When I got home that afternoon, I found an envelope tucked into my door. Inside was a check for $1,500 from Sharon, the restitution payment. There was also a brief note written in careful handwriting. Gregory, I truly am sorry for what I did. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I hope you can eventually forgive me. Sharon. I stared at the note for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up, but I ended up filing it away with all the other documents from the case. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive Sharon, but at least she'd finally acknowledged what she'd done. Life gradually returned to normal over the next few months. Spring came, the snow melted, and I stored my snowblower away for the season. Sharon's house went up for sale in April, and she moved out of the neighborhood by May. I never saw her again after the court hearing, which was fine by me. The new HOA board turned out to be dramatically better than the previous one. They organized neighborhood events, maintained the common areas properly, and only issued fines for legitimate safety violations. The atmosphere in Maple Ridge Estates improved noticeably. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out, and the constant anxiety about arbitrary HOA enforcement disappeared. Dave and I became better friends through the whole ordeal. We started having regular barbecues in the summer, and other neighbors would join us. Mrs. Patterson made her famous potato salad, and the Martinez kids would play basketball in my driveway. It felt like what a real community should be. One evening in June, we were all gathered in my backyard for one of our cookouts when Mrs. Patterson raised her glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, "to Gregory for standing up to tyranny and making this neighborhood a better place." Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. I felt my face getting red. I didn't do that much. I just wanted my snowblower back. "You did more than you realize," Evelyn Palmer said. She'd become a regular at our gatherings. "You could have just let it go, written it off as a loss, but you stood up for yourself, and it exposed everything else Sharon was doing." A lot of people needed someone to show them it was okay to fight back. "Plus, we got it all on video," Dave added, grinning. "That Ring camera was the best investment I ever made." "To Ring cameras," someone shouted, and everyone laughed again. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up, I thought about everything that had happened. When I'd bought my house in Maple Ridge Estates 3 years ago, I never imagined I'd end up in a situation where the HOA vice president would try to steal my snowblower, get caught on camera, face criminal charges, and ultimately get exposed for years of fraud and abuse of power. But here we were. Sharon was gone, the HOA was functioning properly, and the neighborhood was thriving. My snowblower was safely stored in my garage, and I had good relationships with my neighbors. Things had worked out better than I could have hoped. The following winter, when the first major snowstorm hit, I was ready. I rolled out my trusty Ariens Deluxe and cleared my driveway and sidewalk, then helped Mrs. Patterson with hers like always. When I was done, I carefully put the snowblower back in my garage and locked the door. Some lessons only need to be learned once. Dave came over later that day, stomping snow off his boots on my front porch. "Hey, I need to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone. "Please don't tell me someone else tried to steal something," I said. No, nothing like that." Dave pulled up a video on his phone. "Remember how I told you I posted that Ring camera footage on our neighborhood Facebook group? Well, someone shared it to one of those viral video channels on YouTube. It's got like 2 million views." I watched in amazement as my phone filled with the now familiar footage of Sharon stealing my snowblower, but this time with dramatic music and commentary added. The comments section was filled with people expressing outrage at Sharon's actions and praising the importance of security cameras. "I'm internet famous for getting my snowblower stolen," I said, shaking my head. "Hey, at least you got it back," Dave laughed. "And you became a hero for HOA victims everywhere. There's like a whole subculture of people who hate HOAs, and you're their champion now." I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but I had to admit there was something satisfying about knowing our story had resonated with so many people. If it helped even one person stand up to an abusive HOA board member, then maybe all the stress and hassle had been worth it. Over the summer, I was contacted by a local news station that wanted to do a story about HOA reform. Apparently, our incident had sparked conversations in several nearby communities about oversight and accountability. I agreed to be interviewed, figuring that spreading awareness might prevent similar situations. The reporter, a young woman named Jennifer Chen, came to my house with a camera crew. We sat in my living room while she asked questions about what had happened and how it had affected me. "Did you ever imagine that reporting a theft would lead to uncovering embezzlement and fraud?" Jennifer asked. "Not at all," I admitted. "I just wanted my snowblower back. Everything else was a surprise." What would you say to other homeowners who are dealing with abusive HOA board members? I thought about that for a moment. Document everything. Keep records, take photos, get security cameras if you can afford them, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. A lot of these board members rely on people being too intimidated or too busy to fight back. But HOA boards are supposed to serve the community, not rule over it like dictators. The segment aired a week later, and I got dozens of messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some of them were even worse than what I'd experienced. People being fined thousands of dollars for minor infractions, board members playing favorites, selective enforcement of rules, and in several cases, outright theft and fraud like what Sharon had done. It made me realize how lucky I was that we'd had video evidence and a reasonable HOA president who was willing to take action. Many people were stuck in situations with entire boards that were corrupt or incompetent, and they had no recourse except to sell their homes and move. I started attending regional HOA reform meetings, where homeowners and legal experts discussed ways to improve transparency and accountability in community associations. It wasn't something I'd ever planned to get involved with, but I felt a responsibility to use my experience to help others. At one of these meetings, I met a lawyer named Richard Thompson who specialized in HOA disputes. He told me about a case he was working on where an HOA board had foreclosed on a homeowner's property over less than $1,000 in disputed fines. The homeowner, an elderly veteran, had lost his home of 30 years. "The laws around HOAs are complicated," Richard explained. "In many states, HOA boards have extraordinary powers, including the ability to place liens and foreclose on properties. But there's very little oversight to prevent abuse of those powers." "That's insane," I said. "How is that legal?" "It's legal because when you buy a home in an HOA community, you agree to be bound by the CC and Articus, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. A lot of people don't read them carefully before signing. They don't realize they're giving up certain rights and giving the HOA board significant authority over their property." This conversation opened my eyes to just how problematic HOA governance could be. My situation with Sharon had been resolved relatively easily because she'd committed clear-cut crimes that even someone with her board position couldn't defend. But many HOA disputes fell into gray areas where board members could abuse their authority without quite crossing into criminal behavior. I became passionate about HOA reform, joining advocacy groups and speaking at community meetings. It wasn't how I'd planned to spend my free time, but it felt important. The more I learned about the HOA industry, the more convinced I became that the system needed significant changes. One of the most shocking things I discovered was that, in Illinois alone, there were over 7,000 homeowners associations governing more than 1 million housing units. That meant millions of people were subject to HOA rules and regulations, often with minimal oversight or accountability. The potential for abuse was enormous. I worked with Richard Thompson, and other advocates to draft proposed legislation that would create better safeguards for homeowners. Our proposal included requirements for regular independent audits of HOA finances, mandatory training for board members, clearer procedures for disputing fines, and limits on foreclosure powers. Getting legislation passed was a slow process, but we made progress. We met with state representatives, testified at committee hearings, and organized grassroots support. The snowblower theft that had started this whole journey became a rallying cry for the reform movement. In the meantime, life in Maple Ridge Estates continued peacefully. The new HOA board had implemented most of the reforms we were advocating for at the state level, making our community a model for how HOAs should operate. Property values increased, and the neighborhood had one of the lowest turnover rates in the area. People wanted to live somewhere they felt respected and fairly treated. I even started dating someone I met through the HOA reform advocacy work. Her name was Emily, and she'd had her own nightmare experience with an HOA in a different Chicago suburb. We bonded over our shared frustration with the system and our determination to make things better. She was smart, funny, and understood exactly what I'd been through. On our third date, Emily asked me about the snowblower. "Do you ever regret calling the police? Like, do you wish you'd just let it go?" "Never," I said without hesitation. What Sharon did was wrong and she needed to face consequences. But beyond that, if I hadn't reported it, she would have kept abusing her position. Other people would have kept suffering. Sometimes standing up for yourself helps more people than just you. Emily smiled. That's exactly how I feel about my situation. I could have just sold my house and moved, but then the next person would have dealt with the same problems. Sometimes you have to fight. By the time the second winter rolled around after the theft, Sharon's criminal probation was nearly complete. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd finished her community service and paid all her restitution. She was living in a condo in a different town, working as an administrative assistant somewhere. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, but I honestly didn't think about her much anymore. The snowblower served me well through another brutal winter. Every time I used it, I made sure to put it away properly when I was done. Dave and I would joke about the great snowblower heist, as it had come to be known in the neighborhood. The story had taken on a legendary quality, with people who hadn't even been living there at the time knowing all about it. In March, I got an invitation to speak at a national HOA reform conference in Washington, D.C. The organizers had seen the news story about my case and wanted me to share my experience with a broader audience. I was nervous about public speaking, but Emily encouraged me to do it. "Your story resonates with people," she said. "You're not a lawyer or a politician. You're just a regular person who got screwed over by an HOA and fought back. That's powerful." So I flew to D.C. and gave my first major speech to an audience of about 300 homeowners, lawyers, and legislators. I talked about the snowblower theft, Sharon's abuse of power, and how the whole experience had opened my eyes to systemic problems with HOA governance. I showed the Ring camera footage, which still got gasps and angry murmurs from the audience even though many of them had probably seen it online. But I also talked about the positive changes that had come from the incident, how our HOA had reformed itself and created better systems, how our neighborhood had become stronger and more united, how sometimes the worst experiences can lead to meaningful improvements if people are willing to work together. The speech was well received, and afterward, dozens of people came up to thank me and share their own stories. I exchanged contact information with advocates from other states who were working on similar reform efforts. It felt good to be part of something bigger than just my own situation. When I got back to Naperville, I felt energized and motivated. Emily and I started organizing local workshops to help homeowners understand their rights and responsibilities in HOA communities. We taught people how to run for their HOA boards, how to request financial records, and how to properly dispute fines and violations. Dave continued to be a great neighbor and friend. He upgraded his Ring camera system and joked that he was going to catch the next great viral video. Mrs. Patterson baked cookies for all our workshops, claiming that teaching was easier when people had snacks. The Martinez family became involved in the reform movement too, with Mr. Martinez joining our HOA board and bringing fresh perspectives. By the summer, our proposed HOA reform legislation had gained serious traction in the Illinois state legislature. We had bipartisan support, which was rare for any issue these days. The bill passed the House in July and the Senate in September. Governor Pritzker signed it into law in October, and it would take effect on January 1st of the following year. The law included most of what we'd been advocating for: mandatory financial audits, training requirements for board members, clearer dispute resolution procedures, and significant restrictions on foreclosure powers. It wasn't everything we'd wanted, but it was a major step forward. I was invited to the signing ceremony at the state capitol in Springfield. Standing there watching Governor Pritzker sign the bill, surrounded by other advocates who'd worked so hard on this issue, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. It had been 2 years since Sharon tried to steal my snowblower, and that single incident had somehow led to actual legal reform that would protect homeowners across the entire state. Who knew a snowblower could change the world? Dave joked when I called him from Springfield to share the news. It wasn't really about the snowblower, I said, though we both knew he was kidding. It was about standing up to abuse of power and not accepting being mistreated. The new law went into effect on schedule, and HOAs across Illinois scrambled to comply with the new requirements. Some board members resigned rather than deal with the increased accountability, which was probably for the best. Others embraced the changes and worked to make their communities better. In Maple Ridge Estates, the new law didn't require many changes because we'd already implemented most of the reforms on our own. We became a resource for other HOAs that were trying to figure out how to comply, hosting information sessions and sharing our updated bylaws and procedures. My relationship with Emily continued to grow stronger. We moved in together that spring, choosing a house in a non-HOA neighborhood. We'd both had enough of homeowners associations for a while. The house needed work, but it was ours to do with as we pleased, without worrying about whether our paint color was pre-approved or if our trash cans were visible from the street. I still owned my house in Maple Ridge Estates, but I rented it out to a nice young couple who appreciated the community's positive changes. I stayed involved with the HOA reform movement, but less intensively than before. I'd learned that you could make a difference without letting an issue consume your entire life. 3 years after the snowblower theft, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Sharon. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on plain stationery. Sharon wrote that she was writing to apologize again, more thoroughly than she'd been able to before. She explained that she'd been going through a difficult time in her life, dealing with her divorce and feeling like she was losing control of everything. The HOA position had given her a sense of power and purpose, but she'd let it go to her head and started believing her own importance. She wrote about the therapy she'd been in since the arrest, working through her issues with control and recognizing how badly she'd treated people. She acknowledged that what she'd done was wrong and that her apology couldn't undo the harm she'd caused. But she wanted me to know that the consequences she'd faced had been a wake-up call she desperately needed. The letter ended with Sharon saying she hoped I was doing well and that she was glad some good had come from her terrible choices. She didn't ask for forgiveness or even a response. It was just an apology, plain and simple. I showed the letter to Emily, curious about her take on it. She read it carefully, then looked up at me. "What do you think?" "I think people can change," I said slowly. "I don't know if Sharon has really changed, but maybe she has. Either way, I don't have any anger left about what happened. It's been too long and too many good things have come from it." "Are you going to write back?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No, I don't think so. I'm glad she's doing better, but I don't need to be part of her journey. That chapter of my life is closed." Emily nodded. "That seems healthy." I filed the letter away with all the other documents from that time, physical reminders of an experience that had changed my life in unexpected ways. What had started as a simple case of theft had turned into a years-long journey of advocacy, reform, and personal growth. The snowblower still worked perfectly. Every winter, I used it to clear my new driveway and help my neighbors with theirs. I'd never gotten another HOA violation notice, which was easy since I didn't live in an HOA community anymore. Life had moved forward, but sometimes, when the snow was falling heavy and wet, I'd think about that Tuesday afternoon when I came outside to find my snowblower gone. How angry and violated I'd felt. How the Ring camera footage had changed everything. How one person's crime had exposed a system of abuse and ultimately led to meaningful reform. I'd think about all the people whose lives were better now because the HOA laws had changed. The families who wouldn't lose their homes over disputed fines. The homeowners who had real recourse when board members overstepped their authority. The communities that were running more fairly and transparently. And I'd think about how ordinary people, when they refuse to accept mistreatment, can create extraordinary change. Not by being heroes or doing anything particularly special, but just by standing up for themselves and following through. By documenting what happened, calling the appropriate authorities, and not letting people in positions of power get away with abusing that power. Dave still lived next door to my rental property in Maple Ridge Estates. He kept his Ring camera system updated and joked that he was ready to catch the next great scandal. Mrs. Patterson still made her famous potato salad for neighborhood gatherings. The Martinez kids were in high school now, still playing basketball in whatever driveway would have them. Sharon's old house had been bought by a retired couple who loved to garden. They transformed the yard from Sharon's sterile, heavily regulated landscape into a riot of colorful flowers and whimsical decorations. The HOA board approved it all because it was beautiful and harmed no one. That was the kind of community people wanted to live in. One where reasonable people made reasonable decisions for the common good, not where petty tyrants used arbitrary rules to harass their neighbors. The fact that we'd gotten to that point, even partially through such a bizarre incident, was almost funny. Emily and I got married the following fall. We had the wedding at a venue with no HOA, naturally, and Dave was one of my groomsmen. Evelyn Palmer attended, as did several other neighbors from Maple Ridge Estates. Even Richard Thompson, the HOA lawyer I'd worked with on the reform legislation, came to celebrate. During his toast, Dave couldn't resist mentioning the snowblower. I met Gregory when he moved into the neighborhood, and he seemed like a nice, normal guy. Little did I know that he'd become famous for getting his snowblower stolen, and then accidentally starting a statewide reform movement. If that's what he does with a snowblower theft, I can't wait to see what he accomplishes in marriage. Everyone laughed, including me. It was funny how life works sometimes. One moment, you're just trying to clear snow from your driveway, and the next you're testifying before state legislators and speaking at national conferences. You never knew what was going to matter, or what tiny incident might snowball into something much bigger. As Emily and I danced our first dance as a married couple, I felt profoundly grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. The snowblower theft had been frustrating and stressful, but it had also been the catalyst for so much positive change. Not just in HOA laws, but in my own life. I'd found my voice and learned to stand up for myself and others. I'd discovered a passion for advocacy and reform. I'd built deeper connections with my community. I'd met the woman I would marry. All because I'd refused to let someone steal my snowblower and get away with it. The next winter was mild, with only a few small snowfalls that barely required the snowblower. Part of me was almost disappointed. That machine had been through a lot with me, had become a symbol of something much larger than just a piece of equipment. But mostly, I was just happy to have an easy winter and more time to focus on other things. Emily and I talked about starting a nonprofit focused on HOA reform and homeowner education. The need was clearly there, and we had the experience and connections to make it work. We spent months developing a business plan, talking to lawyers and advocates, and researching funding sources. The nonprofit launched the following spring, and we called it Fair Community Coalition. Our mission was to promote transparency, accountability, and fairness in homeowners associations through education, advocacy, and legal support. We offered workshops, published guides and resources, and provided consultation services to communities that wanted to reform their HOA governance. The response was overwhelming. We heard from homeowners all across the country who were dealing with abusive HOA boards, unfair fines, and feeling powerless in their own communities. Some of their stories made my experience with Sharon look mild by comparison. But they were all united by the same basic problem: a lack of accountability and oversight in how HOAs were run. We couldn't help everyone, but we helped a lot of people. We connected homeowners with lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes. We provided template documents for updating bylaws and creating better oversight procedures. We testified in support of reform legislation in other states. Slowly but surely, we were making a difference. 5 years after the snowblower theft, I was invited back to Maple Ridge Estates for a neighborhood celebration. The community was marking the anniversary of Sharon's removal from the HOA board and the subsequent reforms that had transformed the neighborhood. It seemed strange to celebrate something that had started with a crime, but the residents had embraced it as a turning point. I brought Emily, of course, and we walked through the neighborhood that had once been a source of so much stress. Everything looked better somehow. The houses were well maintained, the common areas were beautiful, and there was a genuine sense of community spirit that hadn't existed before. Dave gave a speech about the importance of standing up to abuse of power, making sure to tell the story of the snowblower theft one more time. Everyone laughed in the right places, even though they'd all heard it before. It had become part of the neighborhood's history, a shared experience that had brought them together. Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside at one point. "I never got to properly thank you," she said, her eyes watery. "I was so close to selling my house and moving away. I couldn't stand living under Sharon's regime anymore. But you showed us that we didn't have to accept being treated that way. You gave us our neighborhood back." "I just wanted my snowblower back," I said, echoing what had become my standard response to such praise. "Maybe," Mrs. Patterson said, "but you did a lot more than that, whether you meant to or not." As the sun set on the celebration, Emily and I walked back to our car hand in hand. The snowblower that had started everything was safely stored in our garage at home, ready for the next winter. It was just a machine, but it had changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. "Think you'll ever write a book about all this?" Emily asked as we drove away. "Maybe someday," I said, though I'm not sure anyone would believe it. Woman steals snowblower, gets caught on camera, and it leads to statewide legal reform. It sounds like fiction. "Truth is stranger than fiction," Emily said, "and people need to hear stories like this. They need to know that ordinary people can make a difference." She was right, of course. That's why we'd started the nonprofit, why we continued to speak at conferences and work with legislators. Because Sharon's theft of my snowblower, as absurd as it seemed, had revealed something important about how power can be abused in everyday settings like homeowners associations. And because when someone did something wrong, when they abused their authority and violated the trust of their community, there needed to be consequences. Not just for punishment's sake, but to prevent future abuse and to show others that standing up for yourself was possible. The snowblower still sits in my garage, a little older now but still running strong. I take good care of it, partly because it's a quality machine that deserves proper maintenance, and partly because it represents something bigger. It's a reminder that you never know what small incident might turn into something significant. That doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, can lead to positive change. Every winter, when I roll it out to clear the first snow, I remember that Tuesday afternoon when I discovered it missing. The anger, the frustration, and the determination to get justice. I remember Dave's Ring camera footage, Officer Rodriguez's professionalism, and Sharon's shocked face when she realized she'd been caught. I remember all the people who shared their own stories of HOA abuse, the advocates who worked tirelessly for reform, and the legislators who had the courage to change the laws. I remember the moment Governor Pritzker signed the reform bill, making Illinois a little bit fairer for homeowners. But mostly, I remember the simple truth that sometimes the smallest things matter the most. A snowblower, a neighbor's security camera, and one person's refusal to accept being victimized. That's all it took to start a movement that would help thousands of people. The story of Sharon Whitmore and the stolen snowblower became something of a legend in HOA reform circles. It was the story advocates told when they needed an example of how individual action could spark systemic change. It was the story homeowners heard when they were trying to decide whether to stand up to their own abusive board members. And it all started because I left my snowblower on the side of my house to cool down after clearing snow, because my neighbor had a Ring camera, and because I decided that theft was theft, regardless of who committed it. Sometimes life's biggest moments come from the smallest decisions, and you never know which choice will change everything.